Thank you very much. Do you remember the first time you saw a magic trick? That may have been an uncle making a coin appear from behind your ears, or a silly trick like this. I love magic, and I've spent most of my life dedicated to this weird world of deception and illusions. In the first part of my career, I used magic simply to entertain people. In the latter part, I've been using magic as a way of uncovering some of the secrets of the human mind. Because magic allows you to experience the impossible. But all of the magicians I know, they don't have supernatural powers. Instead, they are tricking your brain and hijacking your perceptual systems, which allows them to manipulate how you experience the world around you. And as a scientist, I'm particularly interested in these tricks because these tricks and mind hacks can provide us with unique insights into how the brain works. And so I'm the director of the Magic Lab at Goldsmiths, and we've used magic as a way of exploring lots of areas in psychology. We study misdirection and mind control techniques to understand consciousness and free will. We apply a lot of these principles to the outside world as well. So, for example, we are teaching robots and artificial intelligence agents magic tricks to try and understand what will happen if machines start to deceive humans. Now, this all sounds very scary and may result in us spending less time on this planet. But don't worry, we also use magic as a way of enhancing people's well-being, so we'll all die feeling much better about ourselves. So tonight, or no, today, it feels very dark in here. This afternoon, I would like to give you a brief glimpse into this world that brings together art and science. And to start off with, who would like to see some magic? Yes. So let me start off by performing the oldest trick in the history of magic. And this is known as the cups and balls. I've got 2 cups. Can you just check out one cup? Here, you can hold on to it, make sure and this one over here, you can check, and 2 little balls here, check out these balls. Great, solid cups. Yeah, any rabbits, pigeons, lions inside? No? Shame, that would have been really cool. And these 2 balls, nothing has happened to these? No? So, 2 cups, 2 balls, and of course, the most important thing, my magic wand. Oops. Don't worry, there's always another one just about down here. So, watch very carefully. I just wave the magic wand and the ball disappears. This, of course, is all about misdirection. So the secret is to keep an eye on the ball. I said keep an eye on the ball because the ball is still over here. So, one more time. I just wave the magic wand and the ball disappears from my hand, flies all the way through the room, into your pocket. You sitting there. You say, would you mind standing up? Would you mind stand up? Check your front pocket. No, your trouser pocket. But of course the ball doesn't stop there because it flies all the way back through the room and reappears back under the cup. Now watch very carefully how this ball travels from here to here, and likewise this one travels from here to here. They have both changed places. You're clearly not very impressed by this. So one more time, I'll snap my fingers and ball number 2 doesn't travel all the way right over here. Is that better? Watch carefully how this ball penetrates this cup, even though these cups are completely solid. Oops. It's a visual illusion, okay? None of this is real. It's tricks. So one more time, solid, 3 solid, ball number 2 penetrates these cups. Is that too complicated? A little bit complicated? Let me simplify things by getting rid of one of these balls. Or actually, because it's you, I'm going to get rid of both of them. The secret is the ball is still under the cup, okay? You're going to have to pay more attention because it goes into my pocket, it reappears under my knee, it goes through the top of this cup. Just snap my fingers, and there too. Is this too fast? Am I losing? Am I losing you? I was told to speak up. Would you like me to do this in slow motion? Okay, just for you at U3A. Ball number 1. Ball number 2. And under which of these, under which of the cups would you like the balls to reappear? Cup number 1 or cup number 2? You want to change your mind? No? Cup number 2? That's the wrong choice because there's already a lemon underneath. Thank you. But wait. Of course, this wasn't pure coincidence because the chances of you selecting the cup with the lemon were 100, 150, if not 200%. Thank you. So, I'm the director of the Magic Lab at Goldsmiths, and I'm intrigued by the emotions that magic elicits, as well as the tricks that magicians use to manipulate how you experience the world. And so let's start off by asking the question, well, what is magic? Now, rather intriguingly, magic is one of the oldest art forms, and yet, unlike most other art forms, it's very poorly understood. And indeed, research on our experience of magic and the tricks that magicians use has been very recent. It's only been for the last sort of few decades that scientists and magicians have tried to come together to try to answer a lot of these very important questions, because magic deals with some of the most fundamental concepts in psychology. Deals with perception, consciousness, free will, deception, beliefs. And yet, we are only starting to understand some of these questions. So what is magic? Well, I think of magic as creating a conflict in beliefs. It creates a conflict between the things that you are experiencing and the things that you know to be possible. So, you all know that lemons can't appear out of nowhere, yet hopefully that's exactly what you've experienced. And so magic is about creating this conflict in beliefs between the things that you know about the world and the things that you're just experiencing. As scientists were interested in some of these experiences, and a few years ago, we carried out a neuroscientific study to try and understand the neural activation that people experience when they're watching these types of magic tricks. And we use an fMRI scanner, which allows us to measure people's brain activation whilst they watch different types of magic tricks. And we scanned their brains whilst they were in this scanner, and the results are truly remarkable because if we look back here, this is a diagram of the brain, and you can see there's two main areas that have been activated whilst people watching these magic tricks. One of them known as the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex and the other one known as the ACC. What's very interesting about these results is that these are areas that are generally involved in this type of conflict because we are constantly in conflict with ourselves. So at this point in time, you might want to listen to what I'm saying, yet at the same time, you're being distracted by your neighbor coughing. That creates a conflict. We have these conflicts all the time. And what's intriguing is that the brain areas that are associated with processing this general conflict overlap very closely with the brain areas that are activated whilst we are watching a magic trick. And that gives us lots of confidence to suggest that really at the heart of magic is a cognitive conflict between the things that you experience and the things that you believe to be possible. But at this point, I'm going to have to be really honest with you, okay? I know it might look like it, but I really don't have any supernatural powers. So how is it then that I can create these experiences in your mind? Well, to do so, I use psychological tricks. And I use psychological tricks that are truly remarkable and very, very surprising. And this is what I would like to focus on for the rest of this lecture. So, how many of you would like to make a rabbit disappear? Are you up for a little experiment? Yeah? So you should all have a piece of paper, which is not like this, but looks somewhere like this. You should all have one of these. And on the back of this, there's you can see a little rabbit inside the top hat. You should all have one. If you don't, you can maybe share it with someone else. And what we're going to do is we are all going to make this little rabbit and the top hat disappear. And I'm going to give you instructions on how you do this. You close one eye. I'm going to remove my glasses because I find it easier. I'm going to close my eye, my left eye, stretch out the piece of paper and look at the cross. So stretch it out, one eye closed, the left eye closed. Keep your eye on that cross and then gradually bring that paper closer and closer without moving your eye, and at some point that rabbit and top hat will disappear. For me here, is gone now. As soon as you move your eyes, it will come back, but as long as you don't move your eyes and you get the sweet spot, that rabbit will disappear. Have you all got that? How many of you are really disappointed? Okay, now, with a lot of these tricks, the explanation is a lot more fascinating than the trick itself. Hopefully, most of you managed to get that rabbit to disappear. If it doesn't disappear, keep the piece of paper and try it during the tea break or at home. So, why does this illusion work? Well, to understand the illusion, we need to have a bit of an understanding of how the visual system works. So what I have here is a diagram of the eye, and you can see a person outside in the world. The image of that person is projected through your lens onto the back of our eyes, which is known as the retina. And the retina is covered in thousands of little photoreceptors that will encode all of the visual information and then send it through the optic nerve to different parts of our brain that do all of the visual processing. Does that make sense? Yeah. Now, through a little fluke in evolution, there's a bit of a design flaw with our eye. Can anyone spot the design flaw? What's the flaw? Well, most people say upside down, but actually, once you start looking at the visual system, turning an inverted image upside down is a piece of cake. That is really very, very simple. I know it's puzzling, but once you understand the complexity of vision, that is a really easy task to do. What's another flaw, though? What's a big flaw as an engineer? The optic nerve. So all of these neurons have to leave our retina through the optic nerve, which means we don't actually have any photoreceptors on that optic nerve. And what this means is that any information that is projected onto the optic nerve, well, we can't encode it, and so it's never there. And that's how this trick works. So once you get the distance right, and once that rabbit projects onto the optic nerve, the rabbit will simply disappear. But I promised you a miracle. That's not the miracle yet. This is the really amazing thing. How many of you have noticed this blind spot? We don't. And even if you close one eye and look around the world, you don't see it. I've told you about it. You've experienced it. Yet, we simply don't notice it. It's big. It's about that size over here. I mean, you just saw it. I mean, this is a big spot. And yet, of course, we don't notice it. And the secret to magic involves exploiting lots of these blind spots. Do you want to see an even bigger one? Okay, let me tell you about my favorite one. We move our eyes about 3 times per second, and during each of these eye movements, your visual system is blind. You're in darkness. And again, you can either trust me, or you can try yourself. So next time you go to the toilet or you're standing in front of a mirror, try and spot your eyes move. You can't. If you can, send me an email, and I'll pay you £1,000. You simply can't see your eyes move. And again, from an engineering point of view, that makes a lot of sense, because if you're trying to take a picture with a moving camera, you get a blurred image, and that will be completely pointless anyway. And so instead, the eyes, the visual system shuts down during these 100 milliseconds or so during which you're making your eye move. But are you noticing this? You noticing this? Any of these? No. Now, you might think, well, that's not that much, but let's do a little bit of maths. During each of our eye movements, we are blind for about 1/10 of a second or 100 milliseconds. I said before, we make about 3 eye movements per second, which means per day you make 150,000 eye movements. Multiply that by 100 milliseconds, you end up with 4 hours, which means that a quarter of your day you spend in darkness. And yet, we're oblivious to this darkness. Do you want me to take it a bit further? So, now I've illustrated this blind spot, the fact that you're spending a quarter of your day in darkness. But even for the moments where you do actually feel you are seeing things, well, you're far less observant than most people think they are. I mean, how many of you, have you got any good observers in here? Who thinks they're pretty observant? Yeah, got a few. Okay, I'm going to give you a little test, okay? How many of you played Spot the Difference? Yeah? Okay, so this is going to be a bit like Spot the Difference. I just did this morning. You've got a nice picture here of the Royal Institute, the hallway coming in. And we're going to play Spot the Difference, but rather than having the pictures next to each other, I'm going to alternate between the 2 pictures. And what I'd like you to do is hold up your hand when you spot the difference, okay? Don't shout it out. If you spot it, don't shout it out. Just hold up your hand. And I'm going to watch especially those really good observers of you, okay? You ready? Okay, let's go. Come on. I know tea break is coming, but I'd expect a little bit more. Come on. You're not getting it? Check out the picture up here, okay? Pretty obvious, isn't it? Well, of course, it's obvious once you know it, but if you don't, you're blind to it. Now, even now, as you're looking at it, you're laughing. How could you not have noticed this in the first place? And the reason why you don't see this is because you're not paying attention to this. And so unless you're actually attending to something, you simply won't see it. And the key to misdirection, and you might think, well, okay, this only happens in this artificial context here. It doesn't. This is a lovely study carried out by Levin and Simons and Levin a while ago, where they asked a volunteer here for directions on an American campus. And just watch what happens. So they're having a conversation. You can see that the lady is looking at the guy wearing the hat. They're having a nice conversation. And yet, she fails to notice that the person has changed. Now, here you're laughing. Oh, well, this could only happen in America. It doesn't. I had a PhD student who carried out studies at Spitalfields Market here in London, where they changed a person for a mannequin, and most people did not notice that they were talking to a mannequin. And so, intuitively, we believe that we should be aware of all of these things that are going on around us, and yet we simply don't. Like with the blind spot, or the blindness that you'll find yourself during most of your daily lives, your awareness of the outside world is much more impoverished than most people think. So, how does this link to magic? Well, of course, as a magician, I try and exploit a lot of these limitations. And we do this to try and understand why people fail to see these really obvious things in their environment. And what I'd like to do now is just give you a little bit of a demonstration of how we study these principles in the laboratory. And I'm just going to clear a bit of space here. And also, this is such a beautiful auditorium, isn't it? Can you all see really well? Yeah? It's amazing visibility, which as a magician is really, really rubbish, okay? So I'm not sure whether this is going to work for a lot of you. It's going to work for you guys here. Yeah, you're going to have a little bit of a more privileged vision of this. But this is just an experiment. It's not a magic trick. It's an experiment on misdirection. And I'm going to just, this is pretty quick, okay? It's not very long. I'd just like you to watch and observe. Are you ready? Yeah. Gone. How many of you did not notice how the lighter disappeared? Wow, most of you. You guys saw most of it? Yeah, should we all laugh at those over there? You ready for that? Would you like me to show it again? Yeah? Has anyone got another lighter? Don't worry, I've got another one. I've got another one here. So we're going to do exactly the same thing again. Now, before we continue, just remember that okay? That's very, very important. Remembering it? So how is it done? Well, this is not a magic trick because magicians wouldn't do this, but we use these kind of things to study misdirection in the lab. And so here I'm using lots of different misdirection principles to misdirect your attention. We've got a bright light, which will hopefully grab your attention. I'm using movement to move your attention from the lighter over here. This is the point at which I'm going to drop it. So I'm using everything. I'm using my social gaze, so where I'm looking, the sound, the movement, everything put together to hopefully prevent you from seeing this drop. Now, I mentioned at the beginning that the gasp is really important because magic only works if you're unaware of your limitations. And of course here, you're not aware of the limitations. Intuitively, you think, well, surely I should be seeing these things because they're happening right in front of your eyes. And yet, you simply don't. Now, what I'm going to try and do now is give you a bit of a demonstration, a further demonstration of how we study this in the lab. And I'm going to ask Pete to come and help me here. This is truly a proper demonstration. Pete, can you just please give Pete a hand of applause for us for helping out? And when magicians say they're doing an experiment, they're lying because they always know that it's going to work. This is science. I don't know whether it's going to work. So Pete, would you mind, I've got a chair here. Would you mind just having a seat here? So in the lab, I often use eye tracking to try and study people's eye movements, and you can hopefully see on the screen here. So what I have here is an eye tracker, and Pete, if you just put this, would you? If I give this to you, don't break it. It's very expensive. It looks like a pair of glasses, but what we have here is two cameras. So we've got one camera in the front here. Pete, can you all give Pete a big wave? So you can all see yourself waving. So we've got one camera here that is filming what Pete is looking at. And then we've got another camera, a tiny camera here. This is this camera, which is filming Pete's eye. And now you can actually see Pete's eye move like this. And you can see these jerky kind of eye movements. That's the way that we normally move our eyes. So we make these saccades that I was talked about before, like these eye movements. They're very fast eye movements. We make about 3 of them per second. And what the eye tracker now is doing is trying to work out the center of Pete's eye. And this doesn't tell me that much yet. So what I need to do now is calibrate this eye rotation to different points in space. And I'm going to do this by flashing up some dots. So let's see whether this is going to work. So this is the calibration. So Pete, if you could just look at that dot for me. Actually, can you come just a little bit closer? So just look at that. So what's happening now is the eye tracker is calibrating spaces in the physical world to Pete's eye rotation. And if this works, normally I would not do this under so much pressure. Maybe just move your head a little bit towards it. Do you mind if I just direct your head a little bit? Like that. It's triggering that. Got that there. Great. So now, Pete, can you look at me? That dot is roughly tracking his eye movements. Can you see that? It's pretty off at the moment because we haven't done the very accurate calibration. And what I can do now is I can perform some magic tricks and try and work out where you are looking. So thank you very much, Pete. So I'm going to remove this from here. Now, of course, we don't just do this. A lot of this is a lot of fun. But we don't just study magic for fun. There's a serious side to this. So one of the things that we've repeatedly found in a lot of these studies is that people can actually be looking at something, and yet they still don't see it. So sometimes we have people who are looking at the lighter drop, and yet they simply don't see it. And again, intuitively, you think, well, surely, if I'm keeping my eye on something, if I'm looking at something, I should be able to see this. And yet, that's simply not the case. So there's lots of instances where you can be looking in the right place, but your mind is being misdirected or distracted. And that's what influences whether you're actually going to be able to see something or not. And so this has got important practical implications. Do any of you remember Google Glasses? Yeah? Google Glasses was this idea that you should be able to present people with information as they're riding a bicycle or driving, and they should be able to process this information because, of course, they've got their eyes on the road. Well, what this research is telling us is that this is an awful idea because just because your eyes are on the road doesn't mean that you'll be able to see it. Think about mobile phone use. So in the UK, we're banned from driving whilst talking to someone on a handheld set. And that's for very good reason, because, of course, talking to someone on a phone is very distracting, and it'll prevent you from seeing the cars in front of you. But what this research is telling us is that it doesn't matter if your eyes are in the right place. It's not because you're just fiddling around with your phone that driving with a phone is dangerous. It's because your mental capacity is being distracted. And that's why talking to someone driving whilst talking to someone on a hands-free set is just as dangerous as it is holding a handheld set. And yet we don't notice it. In fact, talking on a phone whilst driving is as dangerous as driving whilst being legally drunk. But at the beginning I said, this is all about exploiting these counterintuitive and surprising limitations. And for the same reason that magic works, it's very difficult to actually convince people to take other measures because you're simply not aware of them. And so our awareness of the world is far more limited than most of us would assume. But what about the things that you do see? Well, I would argue that even if you do see something, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the way the world actually is. So have a look at this picture here. What do you see? Who sees a rabbit? Who sees a duck? Who sees both switching between? Okay, you're all healthy. Great. This is a form of images known as bistable images, and it beautifully illustrates the fact that you can actually be looking at something and yet you can see something completely different, because as your perception changes from a duck to a rabbit, the outside world isn't changing. is all happening inside your brain. And although the eyes are responsible for capturing visual information, all of the seeing happens inside our brains. And so, as you are trying to make sense of the world, your brain is using lots of information, visual information, and trying to figure out, well, what is this thing out here? And given that vision involves lots of computations, it can be tricked, and it can lead to errors. Have a look at these two tables. Which of these tables looks wider, the one on the left or the one on the right? Well, the one on the right looks a lot wider, but in actual fact, they're exactly the same. And I can demonstrate this by removing some of the context and rotating the image, and you can see now they're exactly the same. It's exactly the same surface area, yet they look very different. I can add the context again, and they look very different. And even though you know that it's exactly the same surface area, you experience it as being very different. It's because your brain is trying to interpret what you're actually seeing. What about this? Do you all remember this picture? An image that almost broke the internet, because some people see the stripes as black, others see it as gold. And people couldn't understand how their friends could experience things differently. It's a bit like one of these big Brexit moments that really divided the country, because we didn't understand how people could actually look at something as simple as color and experience it in very different ways. Now, I'm going to try and resolve that Brexit divide by showing an illusion that will hopefully bring you all together. Have a look at this cube here. Got a few squares. What's the color of the square here in the middle? Orange. What about the one up here? Brown. You all agree on that? Yeah? Or a few of you not. Hopefully most of you will agree on that. What if I told you that exactly the same color? So this is a beautiful illusion by Lotto, and what I can illustrate is once I remove some of the context, I'm just doing this by covering some of these squares. It looks exactly the same. They're the same color. Once I start removing the context or the masks, they look very different. And again, the reason for this is because even simple things as perceiving color is your brain making stuff up. You get some information and then you interpret it in a certain context. And here you're using the context of the illumination to try and make the best estimate of what the color actually is. Are you ready for the biggest, or for me, like one of the most amazing illusions? Yeah? This is really going to fry your minds. Are you ready for this? Okay. I'm going to show you the magic trick first, and again, this is fairly quick. Go on. This will work much better for you guys than for you guys on the side and for you up there as well. How many of you saw a ball disappear somewhere up here? Yeah, quite a few of you. Great. This is known as the vanishing ball illusion, and it's an illusion that was first studied by a guy called Norman Triplett in about 1900. The illusion is not, the way it's done, I just throw it up, and then on the final time, I just pretend to throw it, and I actually secretly palm it inside my hand. But what's interesting is that about 2/3 of people experience a ball moving up and then disappearing somewhere up here. So you are seeing something that hasn't actually happened yet. But that's not even the freaky bit. Let's get to the really, really freaky bit. What if I told you I could see the future? You're laughing. How many of you believe me? No? What if I told you that you can see the future? Even more surprising. Well, you are. And again, to understand this, we need to have a bit of a closer look at how visual perception works. This is a diagram of the visual system and the brain. And again, to understand this illusion, we need to understand the physiology behind it. So as I'm capturing information about the world out here, my eyes encode the information. The retina has all of these photoreceptors that then transfer that information into electrical signals, and that information is then sent through different neural centers to the visual cortex and other cortical areas that are responsible for the seeing. So perception happens inside our brains, not in the eyes. But transmitting that information takes time. It takes about 1/10 of a second or 100 milliseconds for the information to travel from the eye to the visual cortex. 1/10 of a second. So what does that mean? Well, of course, it means that by the time you've seen something, it's already in the past. And yet, catch. Amazing. Amazing. Can you catch it to me? You can applaud me. Because, and I'm not being sarcastic, because of course, this should simply be impossible. If I'm seeing the world in the past, how can you catch something? Now you might think, okay, 1/10 of a second is not that long. 1/10 of a second, if I'm walking at about, this is about 1 meter per second, 1/10 of a second delay means that the world should be lagging about 10 centimeters behind me. And yet, it doesn't. I'm not constantly bumping into things, I can catch things. And so how can I do this? Well, the reason we can do this is because you are genuinely seeing the future. So what your brain is doing is every second of your daily life is actually using information from the past to predict what the future is going to be. So what you're seeing as the now is not the now, but it's what your brain predicts the now to be based on information from the past. Isn't that amazing? I mean, it fries my mind, and I've talked about and studied this for many years. And so the reason why this vanishing ball illusion works is because what you are seeing is based on what you're predicting. So when that ball is moving up, it's your brain predicting that it should be moving up based on everything that you are expecting. And it's again one of these beautiful examples of how we can use magic to try and uncover some of these secrets. I know a lot of you, this is not a feel-good. It's not really a feel-good talk, but I'd like to end up on a kind of like a better message, because so far I've just illustrated how rubbish you are, all of these things. But that's the wrong way to think about the brain. Let's have a look at mobile phones. Throughout the years, engineers have managed to pack more and more processing capacity into smaller and smaller devices. And of course, processing information in the brain requires neurons, and these neurons require energy and then require a place to be housed. And so there's a simple conundrum, really. Either we process all of the information completely accurately, but that would require these huge brains. I mean, the size of my head would have to grow this big, so my body would barely be able to support it, or we come up with very clever tricks and shortcuts to facilitate some of this information processing. And luckily for us, this is the route that evolution has taken us down. So although your brain is constantly being fooled by a lot of these illusions, well, this is something that we should celebrate, because what it illustrates is just how clever the brain is at solving these truly impossible tasks. So thank you very much for your attention. I have just recently published a book called Experiencing the Impossible, which is, which has a lot of these, really discusses a lot of these surprising illusions. I hope you found this illuminating and interesting. Thank you very much.
Okay, so we have a time for a couple of questions. And is there anyone in the gallery with a question that I need to send someone running?
Thank you. Fascinating talk. Thank you. Why do we... You say it's about conflict, and yet we delight in it. Why do we find it such fun to be so confused?
That's a really interesting question. And what's even more interesting about it is that I think even magic is such an old art form, and yet it's a question that very few have ever posed. And I think there's different reasons for this. For one, if we look at infants, for example, infants are really drawn towards things they don't understand. And we actually use this in the lab, so to try and understand how infants process information, we give them different types of illusions, and what you find is that they spend more time looking at the illusion that doesn't make sense to them, or the one that violates their understanding of the world. And that makes evolutionary sense, because if you try and explore things that don't actually make sense, well, that encourages you to learn more about the world. And it's possible that one of the reasons why we enjoy magic is because of this deep-rooted cognitive mechanism that encourages us to explore the world. But of course, there's another side as well. It's the whole idea of deception as well. Why is it that people enjoy deception? I mean, I'm lying to you, I'm deceiving you. Some of this may seem quite unsettling as well. And I think in everyday life, some of these illusions and these deceptions, they could feel really unsettling. But in the context of a magic performance, you know this is a safe space. You know this is a performance, and that allows you to embrace some of these negative emotions. It's a bit like with horror films as well. A lot of people enjoy horror films, and they enjoy them because they can watch them in a safe space. Whilst if you'd be walking down the street and you see someone being shot or mutilated, that wouldn't be a very nice experience. And I think there's lots of different psychological reasons why we enjoy magic. But what I find really interesting is that nobody's actually asked these questions. We've asked questions about why we enjoy art, why we enjoy music, dance, and yet the simple question, why do we enjoy magic, is one of these questions that we're really only just now starting to understand.
Thank you. And we have a question. You might not be able to see it, but there's one in the
can't,
gallery.
no.
We can hear your voice, though.
Thank you. I think you said that not everyone would have seen that ball going up the last time when it didn't go up. What does that say about those of us who didn't see it go up?
We simply don't know yet. We have carried out quite a few experiments on this. We carried out a study on autism. I'm not going to go into the results in too much detail because they're actually very difficult to interpret. But of course, there's different reasons. I mean, maybe you're just not making those predictions. Maybe you're paying less attention. At the moment, we simply don't know. I mean, yeah, I could go into a really complicated explanation with regards to autism, but I just don't think we've got the scope really to go into that much detail here. I've written about it in more detail in my book as well, if you're really interested.
Okay, thank you very much. We have run out of time, but I will say, if you do have any burning questions, we do have an events inbox that you can send them to us, and then we will pass them on to speakers, and hopefully, if they have time, because they are very busy people, we might get some of them answered. But I'm very aware it is tea break time. But before you do that, and toilets on the ground floor if you need those, a huge round of applause, and thank you for good stuff.